Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. I'm still processing what happened last week, but I had to share this story because the sheer audacity of what my HOA tried to pull still has me shaking my head. This whole mess started because of an oak tree and ended with me teaching them a very expensive lesson about property rights. Let me give you some background first. I live in what's called a flag lot, which basically means my house sits behind other houses, and I have a long private driveway that connects to the street. It's like having your property shaped like a flag on a pole. The driveway part is what's called a deeded easement, meaning I legally own the right to use that strip of land to get to my house even though it passes near other properties. I have all the paperwork to prove it too, including a certified land survey and the original deed from when I bought the place 5 years ago. The thing about me is I keep records of everything. I mean everything. Every HOA meeting minute, every bylaw change, every email, every piece of mail. I have filing cabinets full of documents because I learned early on that in any dispute, the person with the best paperwork wins. This habit was about to save me in a big way. Now, the HOA in our neighborhood is run by this woman who we'll call the board president. She's one of those people who moved here and immediately decided she needed to control every blade of grass and mailbox color. The woman has been after me for 3 years about this massive oak tree on my property. It's easily 150 years old and sits right at the corner where my easement meets the street. The tree is gorgeous, provides amazing shade, and is actually protected by city ordinances because of its age and size, but the board president hates it. She's constantly going on about how it ruins the uniform look of the street and how the other houses have these perfectly manicured little decorative trees in front. She's sent me probably 24 letters over the years demanding I cut it down. I've ignored every single one because the tree is on my property, it's protected by law, and frankly, it was one of the main reasons I bought the house in the first place. About 6 months ago, she escalated things by trying to claim the tree was a safety hazard and threatening to fine me. I responded by sending her a copy of the city arborist's report that I had commissioned, showing the tree was perfectly healthy and posed no danger. I also included copies of the relevant city codes protecting heritage trees. That seemed to quiet things down for a while. Fast forward to 2 weeks ago. I'd taken a long weekend trip to visit family out of state. Nothing fancy, just needed to get away for a few days. I drove back Sunday evening around 9 p.m., tired from the road and looking forward to sleeping in my own bed. That's when I saw it. Blocking my driveway completely was this massive, ancient fire truck. I'm not talking about a regular-sized truck here. This thing was enormous, like something from the 1950s that had been decommissioned. It was painted bright red, but looked like it hadn't run in decades. There were orange traffic cones placed all around it and a large white sign attached to the front that read, "Future site of the Heritage Gate. Temporary obstruction for community improvement." I sat in my car for a full minute just staring at this thing. There was no way to get around it. My driveway is only about 12 feet wide, and this truck took up every inch plus some. I couldn't even get close enough to my garage to unload my luggage. I parked on the street and walked over to get a better look. The truck had to be at least 35 feet long and was sitting directly across the entrance to my easement. There was another smaller sign that said, "Project authorized by HOA board. Contact board president for details." I immediately called the board president. The phone rang several times before she answered with this sickeningly sweet voice. She told me she hoped I had a nice trip and that she was glad I was back to see their new community improvement project. When I asked her what the hell she thought she was doing blocking my driveway, her tone changed completely. She explained that the board had voted to temporarily store the fire truck there while they prepared the site for a new heritage gate that would beautify the neighborhood entrance. I reminded her that this was my private easement and she had no right to put anything on it. She laughed and said that since the land looked like community property and was at the street entrance, they had every right to use it for community improvements. She claimed my personal convenience didn't outweigh the community's aesthetic needs. When I pointed out that I had a deeded easement and this was completely illegal, she got nasty. She told me the truck would be there for at least a month while they got permits and prepared the site. She suggested I park on the street 2 blocks away and walk to my house like it was no big deal. I asked her where exactly they got a 50-year-old fire truck from, and she said they had purchased it from a neighboring county that was scrapping old equipment. They planned to restore it as a decorative centerpiece for the Heritage Gate project. The whole conversation lasted about 10 minutes, and by the end I realized this wasn't some misunderstanding. This was deliberate harassment designed to force me to negotiate about my tree. She even hinted as much, saying that if I was willing to be more reasonable about certain property improvements, they might be able to find an alternate location for their project. I hung up and walked back to look at the truck again. That's when I noticed something that changed everything. There was a small puddle of dark fluid under the front end. I got down on one knee with my phone's flashlight and saw a steady drip coming from what looked like the hydraulic system. The fluid was thick and had that petroleum smell. This wasn't just an old truck blocking my driveway anymore. This was a potential environmental hazard leaking toxic fluids onto my property. I took about 20 photos of the leak from different angles, making sure to capture the date and timestamp. Then I went inside and started making phone calls. First, I called the city planning office's after-hours line and left a detailed message about an unpermitted structure blocking a deeded easement. Then I called the environmental hotline about a potential petroleum leak on residential property. I wanted these reports on record before I did anything else. The next morning, I started digging deeper into this Heritage Gate project. I called the city permit office and asked about any applications for gate construction or installation at my address. The clerk checked and told me there were no permits filed, no applications pending, and no record of any gate project anywhere in the neighborhood. So now I knew for certain this was a complete sham. There was no Heritage Gate. This was just the board president trying to make my life miserable until I agreed to cut down my tree. I also called the local towing company that the HOA has a contract with. I spoke to the dispatcher and asked about getting the truck removed. She told me they had received specific instructions from the HOA not to touch that vehicle under any circumstances. The board president had apparently called them personally and told them it was part of an approved community project. This is when I realized I needed to get creative. Instead of fighting them through the usual channels, I decided to treat this exactly like what it was: an abandoned industrial vehicle leaking hazardous fluids and blocking emergency access to private property. I spent Tuesday morning researching heavy equipment recovery services. I wasn't looking for a regular tow truck. I needed specialists who could handle something this size and who wouldn't be intimidated by HOA contracts. I found a company about an hour away that specializes in recovering commercial vehicles, construction equipment, and industrial machinery. When I called them, I explained that I had an abandoned vehicle leaking hydraulic fluid and blocking the only emergency access route to my property. I told them I was the property owner with a deeded easement and needed the vehicle removed immediately for safety reasons. The dispatcher asked me a few questions about the size and type of vehicle, then quoted me a price that made me whistle. Because of the age of the truck and the fact that it probably hadn't been started in years, they'd need to bring their rotator crane truck to lift it completely. The base fee was $2,800 plus $180 per hour for the crew, plus mileage and disposal fees. All told, we were looking at around $4,200 to remove the truck and transport it to their secure impound facility. I asked about payment, and they said they could take my credit card for the drop fee, but ultimately the bill would go to whoever owned the vehicle. I told them that was perfect, and scheduled the removal for Thursday morning. Wednesday night, I prepared my documentation. I made copies of my deed, the land survey, the city arborist's report about my tree, and all my photos of the leak. I also drafted a letter authorizing the removal of any unauthorized equipment from my private easement at the owner's expense. Thursday morning at 8 a.m., I was waiting in my front yard when the recovery truck arrived. And let me tell you, this thing was impressive. It was a massive tow truck with a rotating crane boom that could lift 75 tons. The driver was this no-nonsense guy who had been doing heavy recovery for 20 years. He walked around the fire truck, checked the leaked fluid, and confirmed that it would need to be lifted completely since the brakes were probably seized and the tires were in rough shape. He had me sign some paperwork authorizing the removal and took photos of my deed and the leak for his company's records. By this point, neighbors were starting to come outside to see what was happening. Word travels fast in our neighborhood, and several people had gathered on the sidewalk to watch. The driver positioned his truck and began extending the crane boom. The whole process took about 2 hours because of how carefully they had to lift the old fire truck to avoid damaging it further. But eventually, there it was. This massive piece of vintage fire equipment suspended in the air by a crane. You should have seen the looks on everyone's faces. Here was the HOA's grand Heritage Gate centerpiece being hoisted away like a piece of junk. The driver loaded it onto his flatbed trailer and handed me the receipt. I paid the $4,200 drop fee with my credit card and watched them drive away with the truck. My driveway was finally clear, but the real fun was just beginning. About an hour later, the board president came storming over to my house. She was absolutely livid, demanding to know what I had done with their truck. She was practically screaming about theft and destruction of community property. I calmly explained that I had an abandoned vehicle leaking hazardous fluids removed from my private property by a licensed recovery service. I showed her the receipt and pointed out that the truck was safely stored in a secure facility where the legal owner could claim it any time by paying the recovery and storage fees. She threatened to call the police, so I handed her the business card for the recovery company and suggested she do exactly that. I mentioned that they were fully licensed and bonded, and that everything they did was completely legal since they were removing an unauthorized vehicle from private property at the owner's request. That's when she demanded to know how much the recovery cost. When I told her $4,200, her face went white. Then I mentioned that the impound facility charges $200 per day for storage of large vehicles. She asked how I expected them to pay for this, and I told her that wasn't my problem. The recovery company had a lien on the vehicle now, and the HOA could work out payment arrangements with them directly. What she didn't know yet was that I had already spoken to my attorney about the next phase of my plan. Friday morning, I received a certified letter from the recovery company addressed to the HOA board, sent to the community management office. The letter detailed the recovery of their vehicle from my property and provided an itemized bill for services rendered. It also explained that storage fees were accruing daily and that they had 30 days to claim the vehicle before additional penalties applied. But I wasn't done. Friday afternoon, my attorney filed a construction lien against the HOA's common area properties to secure payment for the emergency hazardous obstruction removal. The lien covered not just the recovery costs, but also compensation for the violation of my property rights and the cost of my attorney's services. The legal theory was simple but effective. By placing their vehicle on my property without permission, the HOA had committed tortious interference with my property rights. By creating an environmental hazard, they had endangered my property and potentially violated environmental regulations, and by blocking my emergency access route, they had created a public safety issue. The construction lien meant that the HOA couldn't sell, refinance, or transfer any of their common area property until the debt was satisfied. In practical terms, this would prevent them from completing any major projects or transactions until they paid up. Monday morning brought an emergency HOA board meeting. I know this because they're required to notify all residents of emergency meetings, even when they probably wished they didn't have to. I didn't attend the meeting, but I heard about it from several neighbors who did. Apparently, the board president tried to spin the whole thing as me overreacting to a minor parking issue. But when the other board members found out about the $4,200 recovery bill, the $200 per day storage fees, and the construction lien on their property, the mood changed quickly. Here's where the board president's problems really started piling up. It turns out that she had authorized the placement of the fire truck without a full board vote, which violated their own bylaws. Section 4.2 of the HOA governing documents specifically states that any expenditure over $1,000 or any action that could create liability for the association requires a majority vote of the full board. But it gets worse for her. The HOA's insurance company had been called about potential coverage for the recovery costs, and they had declined to cover any expenses related to unauthorized placement of vehicles on private property. Since there was no proper board authorization, no permit, and no insurance coverage, the board president had essentially created a massive financial liability for the association through her own unauthorized actions. The other board members were furious. Not only had she potentially bankrupted the association with her grudge against my tree, but she had also exposed them to personal liability for her unauthorized actions. By Wednesday, I received a call from the HOA's attorney. He was very polite and professional, and he got straight to the point. The HOA wanted to settle this matter quickly and amicably. They were prepared to pay all recovery costs, all storage fees, all attorney's fees, and additional compensation for the violation of my property rights. The settlement amount came to $8,400 total. This covered the $4,200 recovery fee, $1,800 in storage fees that had accumulated, $1,200 in attorney's fees, and $1,200 in additional compensation for damages and inconvenience. I accepted the settlement on one condition. The board president had to resign from her position and could not seek election to the board for at least 2 years. The attorney agreed to this condition within 24 hours. The check arrived by courier Friday afternoon, along with a signed agreement that the HOA would never again place any objects, vehicles, or structures on my easement without my written permission. I deposited the settlement money and immediately used part of it to upgrade my home security system. I installed a 4K camera system with motion detection that covers my entire property, including the easement area. I also had a professional sign company create a large, clearly visible sign for the entrance to my driveway that reads, "Private easement, unauthorized vehicles will be recovered at owner's expense, no exceptions." The best part of this whole story happened last Sunday morning. I was outside watering my plants when I saw the former board president walking her dog past my house. She stopped and glared at my oak tree, which was looking particularly magnificent with all its new spring leaves. She caught me watching her, and for a moment we just looked at each other. Then she shook her head and muttered something under her breath before walking away. My tree is still standing tall, my driveway is clear, and I have a very nice security system that I didn't have to pay for myself. Sometimes the best revenge really is just enforcing your legal rights with meticulous documentation and creative problem solving. The new HOA board seems much more reasonable, and I haven't heard a word about my tree since the settlement. I think they learned a valuable lesson about the difference between HOA authority and property rights. As for that old fire truck, last I heard it was still sitting in the impound lot. Apparently the recovery company is willing to release it for the cost of the storage fees, but the HOA hasn't been willing to spend any more money on their failed Heritage Gate project. I drive past that impound lot sometimes when I'm running errands in that part of town, and I always smile when I see that red truck sitting there among all the other abandoned vehicles. It's like a very expensive monument to the importance of respecting other people's property rights. The whole experience taught me that sometimes the best way to deal with bullies is to let them dig their own hole deeper and deeper until they fall into it. The board president thought she could intimidate me into cutting down my tree by making my life inconvenient. Instead, she ended up costing her organization thousands of dollars and losing her position of power. I still keep meticulous records of everything, but now I have the added confidence that comes from knowing exactly how effective those records can be when you need them. And every morning when I back out of my garage, I get to admire my beautiful oak tree and remember that standing up for yourself doesn't always require a big confrontation. Sometimes it just requires knowing your rights and being willing to enforce them creatively. The sign at the end of my driveway hasn't deterred any legitimate visitors, but I haven't had any more unauthorized vehicles either. I suspect word has gotten around the neighborhood about what happens when you mess with the guy who keeps really good records. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I've been working on IT for around 26 years now. Different companies, but you see quite a bit of MC on the IT world. Back in 2005-06, I worked for a telephone company, a huge one, that had the typical Jira-like bug reporting tool for one of its most complicated and convoluted softwares. The software was so complex, so legacy, that even the development team in-house was afraid to do changes in it. Some updates in the past did backfire spectacularly more than once, so even the tiniest update to that software had to take weeks of analysis before taking place. In that dev team worked 3 of my friends from college. I worked on another one that had an easier life. One of my guys at that team was Bedu. To portrait Bedu accurately, imagine that guy that's always playing innocent pranks, that you never know if he's for real when he's talking because he's always saying the most shocking things just for the LOLs, knows a little bit of magic, uses it to prank, loves football, soccer as well. He used to be good at his job, but he's also a quite bit tired of it, procrastinating and generally not putting too much effort on it. The fact that he's part of that software dev team doesn't help. It's not a fast-paced environment and people gets bored by the inaction. So since he's bored, he plays pranks, like connecting a second wireless mouse controller to the PC of a colleague to randomly move the mouse and have him call tech support because his mouse misbehaves, but do absolutely nothing with the mouse when tech support comes. The guy being the target of the prank ended up calling tech support 4 times before being told what was going on. The team once a week also books a windowless meeting room for an hour, so 3 of them can take a nap while the 4th one guards against someone finding out. Who's the guard rotates each week. The requests for update Bedu gets are almost always something in this style. This report indicates that X value is 25 when it should be 27, please fix. Each request typically comes from a different area, but each area sends a couple of requests probably once a month. But Bedu knows that the algorithm doing that calculation is extremely complex. Reports are baked on a monthly basis on batch processes that can take hours. Testing this is extremely painful also. So he updates the end value on the report, where it was 25, now is 27, easy peasy, see you next month. He gets probably like 10, 15 of these requests per day. Bedu updates the bug tool ticket stating on the comment field something like end value verified and corrected and moves on. New boss comes to that dev team from another team on the company. He's well known around the company as being quite dense. He instantly clashes with the team. He thinks quantity equals quality and loves to look into numbers. He comes from the database world, so he's constantly using queries to gather information. He also thinks that each ticket solved is because the underlying condition is being solved. He knows nothing about the complexity of the system. He just thinks that the team is really good at identifying causes and solving them fast. Glorified pencil pusher. He gathers the team and says that he did a query and found out that the comments being put into the bug tool are really short, like less than 50 characters long, and that is not enough to explain what has been done to solve the incident. The whole team explains that what's being put into the comment field is more than enough. He says that comments should at least have 1,000 characters. It's the minimum he'll accept. He says that having comments with less than 1,000 characters will impact his valuation of the work being done. Bedu, being the devious character he is, decides to complain. Especially since he knows that boss would never open the bug tool, he loves his databases. First ticket comes in, this value is this, should be that. He updates value, writes the same comment he always does, end value verified and corrected. And then, taking advantage on the fact that the comment field has format capabilities, WYSIWYG type of editor, copies and pastes the chronicle from the latest football match into the field, changes the color to white and the font size to 1 so it can't be seen against the background on the tool, and closes the ticket. If you're the original ticket poster, that comment field is red only, so unless someone selects and highlights the comment, they won't know that something else is there. Next ticket comes, does the same, but writes a rant about some stupid thing. Then on the next ticket, he just keeps pushing random keys in the spacebar until the character counter reaches 1,000. He gets bored of doing this, so he becomes more ingenious and inventive by the ticket. Somewhere hidden in that bug tool comment system, a complete original Bedu novel separated in small chapters ends up being written that Noon knows about, outside of us few that have lunch with Bedu and the team. Boss comes a month after and says to Bedu, "I've noticed that the size of your comments has gone up last month. You're averaging well over 1,000 characters per ticket. Keep it up." Bedu, plus all my other friends and myself, left the company to greener pastures a year later. I still talk daily with Bedu and people from that team. The next one is an entitled people story. I live in a very rural area. We have community hall dances every few months that me and the girls always attend together. We stay in our group of girls and always have a good time. This time was different. There's always someone hammered at the dance, confusing a community hall dance for a bar, but we always ignore whoever it is that's in that stage. Well, last night they didn't give us much room to ignore them. This guy that I've never seen before walks straight over to our group. Immediately I see him look me up and down, and then he stood there silently for a moment, giving me direct eye contact. For reference, eye contact makes me quite uncomfortable. I looked away and continued talking with my friends. He starts complimenting my hair, and in my head I knew what he was trying to do. I just nodded and said that's nice of him. He continues on to say if he was my boyfriend, he wouldn't leave me alone for any guy to take home. And I said to him, well, me and my fiancé have trust so. And then he keeps going on saying, oh, well, if it were me, I wouldn't let a girl like you out of my sight. He then starts telling my other friend that he will help her up. She was crouching because she was cold and we were outside for a puff break. She declined and he goes, don't worry, I'm not one of those guys. Me and my friends gave each other the look and walked right past the guy to another area. Skip to 10 minutes later, I'm dancing with my girls and we are having a good time. My mom was hitting the dance floor, so I started recording her to send to my sister. Here comes this guy again, and I got this on video. He practically walks through my mom, pushing her out of the way to get to me. He comes right beside me, literally shoulder to shoulder. Keep in mind, this is a dance, not a club. He did not need to be touching me. He leaned into my ear and goes, you can't be recording all of this. I go, well, I'm recording my mom. He replies, your mom? And so I point at my mom and say, yes, that is my mom. And he then changes the subject and says again in my friggin' ear, are you single? Which I'd already answered once. I said, no, I am not. And he goes, oh, you have a boyfriend? I said, actually, and I put my ring right in his face. He takes a second of awkwardly staring at me and my ring still touching me. Also, if you're wondering why I didn't move, he had me basically pinned between him and the table. He put his hands up, steps away, and goes, I respect that, and begins to ask why my fiancé isn't there, and I tell him that my fiancé is a working man and was at his night shift providing for me. I then cut him off his last sentence and tell him, this is me and the girls' song, I'm gonna dance with them, and I walked past him and left him standing there awkwardly. You'd think he'd give up. Nope. He stared at me the entire night. The girl he brought with him comes up to me and tells me she was trying to explain to him that I'm engaged, but he is hell-bent on bringing me home. I told her that's never happening. After two of friends left for the night, I was still hanging out with my friend who was coming back to my place with me. He comes over again, he stands about 2 feet in front of me and starts flirting with my friend. He kept giving me this look like he's trying to make me jealous. But really now you're just making multiple girls uncomfortable. He starts telling my friend, we were outside for a puff break, that she should go inside because she must be cold if he's freezing out there. We told him we were fine, but he was welcome to go back inside. He then starts saying to her that she has to go inside because she will freeze. I looked at him and I said, "She's fine," and he goes, "I know she is, but she should go inside." So me and her look at him and walk past him to go inside together. Behind us, I heard him go, "Look, I'm just trying to make friends. I'm not trying to be rude." We ignored him and left a few minutes after. I forgot to mention earlier, after the first encounter, we told the bouncer to keep an eye on him and left our drinks with the dance coordinator to keep watch because this guy seemed absolutely determined he was going to take me home one way or another. Edit. I forgot to mention the part where he kept saying in my ear, "You're the hottest one here, you know," and I said to him, "Well, that's your opinion," and he goes, "But it's true, you're hotter than all of them." And I said, "Well, I think all my girls are hot." And then he kept saying the same thing throughout our encounters. Just wanted to add that. Edit. I hate that I feel the need to defend myself, but here we go. For those asking why I didn't yell in his face, as I mentioned in another comment, I have PTSD specifically related to this type of thing. I find it very hard to actually have a voice and stand up for myself. I was actually proud of myself for keeping my cool and handling it in a calm manner instead of breaking down and ruining our night. Yelling at a man and telling him to F off has gotten me and many other women into even more dangerous situations. Women do not always feel safe getting loud and aggressive. Making a scene could have made this guy snap for all I know, and he does know people who know where I live, so no, I didn't want to give this person a reason to become aggressive. I didn't give him any signal whatsoever that I wanted him around, none of us did. As I mentioned before, this is an extremely rural area. For those saying they would have left and went to a different venue, that wasn't an option. There is not another dance in town going on the same time, and we weren't going to let this guy push us out and ruin our girls' night. As for people asking why the coordinator didn't tell him to leave, this guy happened to come with the coordinator's daughter, and I'm guessing like me, no one wanted to cause a scene. This guy was a creep, and sure, in the big cities maybe this is something that's easier to handle and more common. I don't go out other than the community hall dances. Our group doesn't have this happen to us. We don't go to clubs or bars. We go to the dances because it's normally a very safe space for us. This was a very new experience for us, and none of us had been through it before to know exactly what to do other than to stay close and walk away to another area in the dance. I did stand up for myself in the only way I physically could as someone with the PTSD I have. I am proud of myself. We were all safe at the end of the night, and even if I didn't scream at the top of my lungs, I held my ground and didn't whimper and cower like I would have in the past. So you can go down the victim-blaming route all you want, but I'm proud of me, my girls are proud of me, and I am safe. If you'd rather blame the women trying to have a good time with their girls instead of the creep who didn't understand personal space and how to respect an engagement ring, then that's your choice. But it says more about you than it does about me. The next one is an entitled parent's story. This summer I worked at a vehicle rental place in a tourist town. For background info, we offer 2 products, regular bikes and surreys, which are these pedal-powered carriage type things. Basically, they have 2 bench-type seats, each seat fits 3, and each seat has 2 sets of pedals. I have a couple stories about weird complaints I received. I swear people lose all their brain cells on vacation. But this one is definitely the most confusing. I guess for extra background, we don't give refunds. It's written on the sign. We're trained to try and provide substitutions and other solutions if there are problems with the bikes or something. We do very occasionally give refunds on purchases made with a card, but it takes a while, and the manager is the only person who has the ability to do it. We cannot refund cash purchases. Now for the story. One day I was on my shift. It was a pretty slow day, so I was just sitting reading my book and waiting for any customers. This woman comes up with her 2 granddaughters and rents 2 bikes, paying in cash. The shack we sit in makes it so we can't see below the counter very easily, and honestly, why would we need to, right? Since I don't make a habit of looking at customers' feet, I didn't notice that one of the girls was wearing a cast on her foot. I give them helmets, show them the bikes, and sit back down as they ride away. About 5 minutes later, they return, and the grandmother just tells me she can't ride this, giving me an expectant look as if I can fix this problem. I explained that we can't give refunds, especially on cash purchases. Then I go into problem-solving mode. Luckily, it was slow that day, so I had time to deal with this. I offer one of our surreys, so only 2 of them have to pedal, and the girl with the cast can sit in the middle. The lady then explains that she has a back problem, so she can't pedal either. At this point, I don't know what she wants. I've done what I can do and told her such. I'm apologizing and repeating that there's nothing I can do, but she's not letting up. She keeps repeating how disappointed she is about this, and her granddaughters just seem bored. I mentioned that only my manager can do refunds, and it's only for purchases on cards. She latches onto this and asks me to call my manager. Also, she assumed my manager was a guy, which just kind of felt weird. I told her I could message my manager, but that she might not respond very quickly because she has a second job she is working at the moment. She was also very surprised that an establishment that is in a restaurant parking lot with a wooden shack and one teenage employee working did not have a manager constantly on call or working. I know that this probably wasn't the most mature thing to do, but I was exhausted and I was only about halfway through my shift. I got her to write her contact info on a sticky note and that we would get back to her about it. I shot my manager a message about it and sent the info, but admitted that I knew there's really nothing we can do and I just needed her off my back. Honestly, I was mostly just confused afterwards. I finished my shift with only a few more customers who were all very normal and polite. I went home and took a shower and a good nap. That lady never got her call back. Anyway, thank you for watching.